Raffaella Santucci, and I'm here today to do a book review on Pale Rider, The Spanish Flu of 1918 and How It Changed the World by Laura Spinney. It was published in 2017 and tells the story of the Spanish flu, often seen as a small detail of World War I or even forgotten, when in reality it was a major world event that killed more people than war in every continent except for Europe. Even though detailing the story of this pandemic is a daunting task due to the uncertainties of the time that became reflected on the historical evidence, Laura Spinney is able to trace an easy-to-follow route throughout the chaos of the Spanish flu. She begins by telling us the origins of the flu virus and how it evolved with humans, going back to the time of the hunter-gatherers, then telling us how it affected colonization and world history until arriving to the global context of 1918. 1918 was a peculiar time period where epidemics were still considered acts of God, doctors' training was patchy, and healthcare was provided by charities or paid for privately. This all contributed to the approximately 50 million deaths caused by the Spanish flu. It had 3 waves overall and began in March 1918. The second wave peaked in August and was the most lethal of all, and the third wave peaked in January 1919. Although for most who caught it just experienced the symptoms of a seasonal flu, for those most extreme cases, there were a myriad of symptoms reported, such as dizziness, loss of hearing or smell, hair and teeth loss, and even bleeding from the eyes and nose. Standing here in my garden in my hometown of Rio de Janeiro, it's hard to imagine the chaos that gripped the city when the Spanish flu finally arrived in the British mail ship in 1918. However, it's important to read about those distressing times because of the lessons that they teach us, especially now living in the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, the city was totally unprepared for the tidal wave of sickness that now overtook it. Doctors kept up punishing schedules and returned home only to find more patients waiting for them. Yet, the population's lack of trust in the government only led them to believe that the authorities were exaggerating the impacts of the flu that was seen as a limpa velhos, a disease that only killed old people of the elite. Eventually, food started to run short and dead bodies started piling up in the streets, leading to a new sanitary risk. Grave diggers had to dig shallower graves, but even then they were not able to deal with the backlog. Thus, convicts were enlisted to help dig the graves. And that's when the horrors began spreading. Stories were told of earlobes being cut to steal jewelry, of lifting up young girls' skirts, and even necrophilia. But as Spinney puts it, were the rumors true or some kind of collective hallucination led by a city living in fear? But how did the Spanish flu even get its name? Because it most certainly did not originate in Spain, even though its origins are still unclear. Well, warring nations kept news of it censored due to fears that it would lower morale. However, Spain was neutral in the war, and when the illness started gripping their country, they were the first ones to publicly announce it, leading unaware civilians in Europe and warring nations to declare it the Spanish flu. However, further from the theaters of war, different countries called it different names. But as they started to realize that they were not dealing with several isolated epidemics, but one global pandemic, a widely accepted name had to be chosen. And thus, that became the name used by the most powerful nations of the time, the victors of the war, setting a historical wrong in stone. There are several other tidbits of information that are profoundly interesting, such as how it was to live at the time, how doctors treated and diagnosed patients, and the several inequalities that they had to deal with during the Spanish flu, especially given that if you lived in Asia, you were 30 times more likely to die than if you lived in certain parts of Europe. Spinney does an extraordinary job showing how culture and geography affected how different peoples dealt with the war. But besides that, she shows us as well how historians pieced together evidence to come up with 3 different theories on how and where the Spanish flu began and how many people actually died from it. As I believe it has become clear by now, I believe everyone should read this book because of the valuable lessons it teaches us on how to deal with a pandemic and the impacts it has on our society, be that on war-torn Europe or isolated communities in Alaska, China, and the Amazon. Spinney brings her book to a close with her forecast on how to prepare for the next pandemic that scientists say is inevitable, and also why did we seem to collectively forget on such an important part of our history. If you are interested in anything I talked about today, I hope you really enjoy your read. Thank you for watching.